I was about to leave for dinner at my son's house when my lawyer sent me a text. That made my heart stop. Call me immediately. I didn't waste a second. I dialed his number. What he told me about my new daughter-in-law left me frozen, in shock, and within just a few hours, I found myself standing in my son's driveway, realizing his perfect marriage was on the edge of collapse. If you're watching this, make sure to hit subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. But before I explain what happened that night, let me take you back. Because what started as a simple dinner invitation turned into the most dramatic evening of my 68 years on this earth. My name is Margaret Thompson. Just 6 months ago, I thought I was the luckiest mother-in-law in America. My son James had finally found the love of his life, Cassandra. She was a pediatric nurse, charming, kind, and she seemed to truly adore both James and his old-fashioned mother. When the two of them asked me to sell my home to help fund their dream wedding, I didn't hesitate. They promised I'd always have a place with them, and I believed it. That Tuesday afternoon, I was pressing my best dress, the navy one with little flowers that James always said made me look distinguished, when my phone buzzed with Robert Mitchell's urgent text. Robert had been my lawyer for 15 years, ever since my husband passed away. He never contacted me outside business hours unless it was something truly serious. Margaret. His voice was tight when I called. I need you to sit down. So I perched on the edge of my bed in the tiny apartment I'd rented after selling my house. The cheerful yellow walls I'd painted to lift my spirits suddenly felt harsh and mocking under the afternoon light. What's wrong, Robert? Is this about the will revisions we discussed? No, Margaret, this is about Cassandra. I froze. About your son's wife. My stomach dropped. What about Cassie? She's not who she claims to be. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire alarm. You know danger is close, but you can't see it clearly yet. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? I mean, Robert said slowly, Cassandra Williams Thompson doesn't exist, at least not the version your son married. I let out a shaky laugh. Robert, that's ridiculous. I've known Cassie for over a year. She's a nurse at Children's Hospital. She grew up in Colorado, lost her parents in a car accident when she was 25. Margaret. Robert cut me off. There is no record of a Cassandra Williams working at Children's Hospital. The woman your son married has been living under a false identity. The dress slipped from my hands and pooled on the floor. Through my small window, I could see the old maple tree where I'd hung a bird feeder cardinals often visited through the lonely winter months, and suddenly that normal, peaceful view felt completely at odds with this terrifying conversation. That's impossible, I whispered. I'm afraid it's not. My investigator uncovered this while running background checks for your insurance policy updates. And what he found? Robert paused, his voice heavy. Margaret, you need to get to your son's house immediately. Don't call. Don't warn them, just go. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I drove to James's house. The whole way there, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily I'd let myself love my new daughter-in-law, maybe too easily. When you've been a widow for 15 years, and your only child is too busy with his career and social life, a warm, attentive daughter-in-law feels like a blessing straight from heaven. And that's exactly what Cassie seemed to be. She called me Mom Thompson with so much affection, it made my heart swell. She'd even been the one who convinced me to sell my home. I can still hear her voice over morning coffee, her hazel eyes wide with sympathy. Mom Thompson, this place is too much for you to handle alone, and honestly, the neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be. I'd lived in that house for 37 years. I raised James there. I nursed my husband through his final illness in the bedroom that overlooked the garden I'd tended with my own hands for decades. But Cassie, she painted such a picture of fresh starts and independence that I found myself nodding along. James and I have been talking, she'd said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. We're going to need some help with the wedding expenses. I know it's a lot to ask, but if you sold the house, you could help us start our life together properly, and you'd have a cute little apartment closer to us. We'd see each other all the time. The wedding ended up costing $47,000. I contributed $35. Zero from the sale of my home, money I had planned to stretch across the rest of my retirement. But seeing James's face glowing with happiness as he danced with his new bride had made every penny feel worth it, or at least it had back then. Now, as I pulled into their driveway behind James's BMW, my stomach twisted. The house they'd bought with the remainder of my money looked like something out of a magazine. Manicured lawn, carefully chosen landscaping, a picture-perfect dream. Through the front window, I saw them moving around the kitchen, smiling and chatting as they prepared for my visit. They looked so normal, so happy. A young couple excited to welcome James's mother for dinner. I sat in the car for a long while, staring at them through the glass. Whatever Robert's investigator had uncovered James didn't know it yet. In a matter of minutes, I was about to shatter his world. But then I saw Cassie laugh at something James said, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair, and in that moment something cold gripped my chest. She had been playing a role this entire time. Every laugh, every hug, every moment I thought was genuine, it had all been an act. And not only had I fallen for it, I had funded it. James opened the door before I could even knock, pulling me into a hug with his broad smile. For just a second, he was still my little boy, even at 42. Mom, perfect timing. Cassie's making her famous lasagna. But when he stepped back, I noticed something. He looked exhausted. Not just tired from work, this was bone-deep exhaustion. Everything all right, honey? I asked softly as we walked inside. Just work stuff, you know how consulting is. He forced a smile, but it never touched his eyes. Then Cassie emerged from the kitchen, radiant as ever, wearing a floral apron over designer jeans. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of a glossy home magazine. Mom Thompson, I'm so glad you could make it. She hugged me warmly, the same affectionate embrace she'd always given me, and for a moment, I wavered. Maybe Robert was wrong. Maybe no one could be that good at pretending. Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, she said brightly. Can I pour you a glass of wine? I opened that Pinot Grigio you brought last time. But as she busied herself in the kitchen, I noticed something I'd never seen before. The house was decorated entirely in her taste. Not a single trace of James remained. His college football memorabilia gone, the antique clock his father left him nowhere. Even the painting he adored from our old house had vanished. It was as if James Thompson had been erased from his own home. Cassie certainly has strong decorating opinions, I said lightly. James glanced around, as if noticing it all for the first time. Yeah, she has great taste. Said my old stuff made the place look like a bachelor pad, but his tone soft. Defensive was the same one he'd used as a boy when trying to justify choices he wasn't truly comfortable with. James, I said gently, lowering my voice. Can we talk privately for a minute? Almost immediately, Cassie appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Is everything okay? Fine, sweetheart, I said with a smile that felt sharp as broken glass. I just wanted to ask James about his work presentation next week. Her hazel eyes narrowed just slightly, so subtly that 6 months ago, I never would have noticed. But tonight, I was looking for cracks in her perfect performance, and I found them, actually. James said quickly, I should check on something. In my office anyway. Mom, want to see the new computer setup Cassie got me? As we walked down the hallway, I caught Cassie in my peripheral vision. She wasn't heading back to the kitchen. She was standing perfectly still, watching us with an expression that was anything but loving concern. No, her look was cold, calculating. In James's office, the only room in the house that still felt like him, I shut the door. Then I turned to face my son. James, I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly. How much do you really know about Cassie's past? He sank into his desk chair, and what I saw in his expression broke my heart. It wasn't anger, it was relief. Like someone had finally dared to say aloud the question he'd been too afraid to voice. Why? He asked quietly. What's wrong? Answer me first. What do you actually know about her background? He stared at his hands for a long time before answering. She grew up in Denver, lost her parents in a car accident when she was 25, worked her way through nursing school, moved here 3 years ago for a fresh start. I leaned closer. Have you ever seen pictures of her family, her childhood home, her nursing school graduation? His voice wavered. She says it's too painful to talk about. The accident was traumatic. But even as he spoke, I could hear the doubt creeping into his words. Mom, what's going on? James's voice cracked with unease. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text thread with Robert. My attorney's investigator dug into Cassie's background while handling some insurance paperwork. James, there's no record of a Cassandra Williams ever working at Children's Hospital. The color drained from his face. That's impossible. She gets calls from the hospital. She talks about her patients all the time. When have you actually heard these calls? I asked gently. James opened his mouth, then shut it again. His eyes widened as a painful realization set in. She always takes them in the other room, says patient confidentiality requires privacy. Have you ever visited her at work, met any of her colleagues? He shook his head slowly. She said the hospital has strict policies against personal visitors in the pediatric ward. His voice dropped to a whisper. Mom, you're scaring me. I'm scared too, honey. But there's more. Before I could finish, the kitchen timer dinged, followed by Cassie's cheerful voice. Dinner's ready. James looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, the same eyes he'd had as an 8-year-old boy, running to me when bullies left him shaken. What do I do? We go eat dinner, I whispered, and we act normal. I'll figure out how to tell you the rest. But when we stepped into the dining room, I saw Cassie at the stove. Her posture was too rigid, To alert, she'd heard more of our conversation than we realized. The table was set with the good china, my good china that I'd given them. As a wedding gift, Cassie had thought of everything: cloth napkins, fresh flowers. A meal that looked picture perfect. "This looks wonderful, dear," I said, taking my seat. I wanted everything to be special. Cassie replied smoothly, though her smile felt forced. "James has been under so much stress at work lately. I thought a nice family dinner might help." As we began eating, I watched her closely, every movement, every word, every flicker of expression, searching for the woman Robert's investigator had described. And slowly, I began to see her. "So, Mom Thompson," Cassie said, sweetly, slicing her lasagna with surgical precision, "how are you settling into your new apartment? I hope you don't regret selling the house." Her tone was casual, but too sharp, too pointed. My nerves tightened. "Actually," I said carefully, "I've been wondering about that. It's been nearly a year since I sold the house, and I realize I never got a clear picture of where all that money went." James looked up. "What do you mean?" "Well, the wedding cost $47,000. And I contributed 35, but I gave you 50 in total. What happened to the other 15? Silence blanketed the table. James frowned, doing the math in his head. Cassie's fork paused halfway to her lips. "There were additional expenses," she said finally. "The honeymoon, some house improvements, my student loan payments." "Your student loan payments?" I kept my tone light, conversational. "I thought you said you worked your way through nursing school." Another pause. I had to take out some loans for the final year. My savings ran out, but James was staring at her now, confusion etched across his face. "Cassie, you never mentioned student loans. When we applied for the mortgage, you said you had no debt." I watched her mask falter just for a second. Panic flashed in her eyes before she smoothed it over again. "I was embarrassed about the debt," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "You were doing so well financially, and I didn't want you to think less of me." "But where are the loan statements?" James pressed. "I handle all our finances now. I've never seen a single payment." Cassie's hand jerked back. She stood abruptly. "I need to check on dessert." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving James and me alone with the suffocating weight of unanswered questions. "Mom," James whispered urgently, "what else did your investigator find?" I slid the folder Robert had given me onto the table. "Her real name is Catherine Blackwood. She's 34, not 38 like she told you. She's been married twice before. Both husbands left after discovering she'd been draining their bank accounts." James stared at the documents as though they were written in a foreign language. This can't be right. "The woman you married," I said quietly, "is a professional con artist. She targets successful, lonely men, studies them, becomes exactly who they need, marries quickly, then starts bleeding them dry." From the kitchen came the sounds of running water and cabinet doors opening and closing. Normal dinner cleanup sounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Cassie was listening to every word. "The $15,000 from my house money?" I continued softly. "She didn't use it for student loans or house improvements. She sent it to an account in Phoenix." I told James quietly, "where her sister lives. Her sister who supposedly died in that car accident with their parents." James shook his head slowly, like a man struggling to wake from a nightmare. "But she loves me. I know she loves me, honey," I said softly. "She's very good at her job." The kitchen had gone to quiet. James noticed it too, his head snapping toward the doorway. "Cassie," he called, "everything okay in there?" No answer. A chill slid down my spine. "James, where does she keep her purse?" "On the counter by the door." "Why?" We both rose at the same time, moving fast but silent toward the kitchen. It was empty. The back door stood slightly ajar, a cool evening breeze stirring the curtains. "Her purse is gone," James said, his voice hollow. I walked to the door and peered outside. At the far end of the yard, near the fence, I saw a figure moving swiftly through the shadows. "She's running." James darted to the front window. "Her car's still here. She must have another one parked nearby." "James, listen carefully," I said, steadying my voice. "We need to call Robert immediately, then we call the police." But James wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the dining room table. "Her phone," he whispered. "She left her phone." I picked it up. No passcode. Another red flag I should have noticed. The call history was nearly empty. But the text messages to someone named Marcus. The old lady is getting suspicious. How much longer do I need to keep this up? The account in Phoenix needs more time, and one from earlier that day. "Emergency, she hired a PI, need extraction plan now." "James," I said quietly, "sit down." He leaned over my shoulder, reading. His face grew paler with each word. She was planning to leave anyway." "Yes," I whispered. "But not until she'd taken everything she could." I opened her Photos app. Barely anything there except several screenshots, bank statements, insurance documents, investment accounts, all of them James's. "She's been documenting your assets," I said, preparing for her final withdrawal. James collapsed into a chair, looking like a man who'd just realized the stranger he lived with wore his wife's face. How long do you think she was going to wait? I thought back her constant pressure for joint accounts, for access to James's retirement, for me to sell my house and give them more. And then the conversation just last week, I think she was planning to disappear right after she convinced you to make her the beneficiary of your life insurance policy, I said. Didn't she bring that up recently? James nodded weakly. She said we should do it after dinner tonight. She even had the forms ready. We stared at each other across the wreckage of what had been, just an hour ago, a happy family. Dinner. His marriage wasn't just over, it had been a lie from the start. But in James's eyes, alongside the pain and shock, I saw something else, relief. You know what the worst part is, Mom? He said quietly. I think part of me already knew. The police arrived within 20 minutes, but by then we all knew Cassie was long gone. Detective Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman about my age, listened to our story with the weary patience of someone who had seen this play out too many times. She flipped through Cassie's abandoned phone, her expression grim. Ma'am, she said to me, you probably just saved your son from losing everything he owns. These marriage fraudsters escalate quickly once they gain legal access to assets. James sat at the kitchen island, staring at the unsigned insurance forms Cassie had set out. His voice was flat. She was so insistent we do this tonight. Said it was romantic, that making each other beneficiaries was true love. Romantic? I repeated dryly. Nothing says I love you like $1 million life insurance policy. Detective Rodriguez almost smiled. Mrs. Thompson, we'll need you to work with our financial crimes unit. Your attorney's investigation gives us a head start. But we have to trace the money and identify other potential victims. Other victims? The words hit me like cold water. How many others? James asked hoarsely. Based on the pattern your investigator uncovered, Rodriguez said, possibly dozens. Catherine Blackwood has been running this scheme for at least 8 years. Across 4 different states. I felt sick thinking about other mothers who had given up their savings for a son's happiness only to watch it vanish into the pockets of a predator. Other men like James who had believed they'd found love only to discover they'd been groomed, manipulated, and drained. Detective, I asked, what are the chances of getting the money back? Honestly, slim. These operations are built to move money fast through multiple accounts and jurisdictions. But we might be able to stop her from targeting anyone else. When the police finally left, James and I sat together in his living room, surrounded by the wreckage Cassie had left behind. The perfect home, the perfect marriage, the perfect wife gone. What remained was the truth, and the truth hurt her. Coffee mug still sat on the side table, lipstick stain perfectly preserved. Her sweater draped casually over the back of the couch, as if she'd only stepped out for a moment. I have to ask you something, Mom, James said quietly, and I need you to be honest with me. I braced myself. Go ahead. Did you ever like her? Really like her, or did something always feel off? I thought carefully before answering. The truth was complicated. I wanted to like her so much that I ignored my instincts. I admitted there were little things that bothered me. But I told myself I was just being an overprotective mother-in-law. The way she never had childhood stories with real details. How she always deflected when I asked about nursing school friends. And in all the months I knew her, not a single person from her past ever called or visited. James nodded slowly. She told me she preferred to live in the present rather than dwell on the past. I thought it was healthy, progressive. It was careful, I corrected, and we both mistook careful for admirable. My phone buzzed. Robert's name lit the screen. The investigator found something else, Robert said without preamble. Can you and James come to my office first thing tomorrow morning? What kind of something else? The kind that's going to make you very angry. The next morning, Robert's office felt transformed. Gone was the calm professionalism of legal consultations today. It pulsed with the energy of a war room. Papers covered every surface. A man I didn't recognize sat at the conference table with a laptop and several thick folders. Margaret, James, Robert said. This is Detective Frank Morrison from the Multi-State Financial Crimes Task Force. Detective Morrison stood, shook our hands. Younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, but with an intensity that made you lean forward. And listen, Mrs. Thompson, he said. Your decision to investigate Cassandra Williams may have cracked open the largest marriage fraud operation we've seen in a decade. He opened a folder and spread out photographs, driver's licenses, wedding portraits, even surveillance images. Every face belonged to the same woman, different hair, different names, different men standing beside her. Catherine Blackwood, Morrison said, alias Cassandra Williams, alias Christine Wilson, alias Carol Warner, for identities confirmed, possibly more. 17 victims across Arizona. Colorado, Utah, and now New Mexico. James's face drained of color as he stared at one wedding photo. Cassie or Catherine, or whoever she truly was, beaming in a white dress beside another man. How long has she been doing this? He asked. Our earliest confirmed case is 9 years old, Morrison said, but odds are she's been refining her operation much longer. I studied the photographs, not of Catherine, but of the men. They all shared something: middle-aged professionals, most recently divorced or widowed. Men with that hollow, desperate look of people who'd given up on love until someone like Catherine appeared. What's her total take? I asked. Morrison consulted his notes. Conservative estimate to $3 million. The number hit the room like a physical weight. James made a sound between a gasp and a groan. But here's the difference, Morrison went on. In every previous case, she disappeared within 6 to 8 months of marriage. With your son, she stayed almost a year. That suggests something new. Different how? I asked, though. I was already piecing it together. She was building something bigger, he said. The other victims lost savings, homes, sometimes retirement accounts. But none of them had a wealthy mother she could manipulate for more. With you, Mrs. Thompson, she saw a long-term target. James was just the entry point. The room went silent. James's eyes burned into me, but I couldn't look at him. My focus stayed on the photos, on the evidence spread across the table. You're saying I was the real Mark? I said at last. That's our working theory, Morrison replied. The timeline supports it. She met James right after his promotion was announced in the Business Journal. She researched his family, learned about your husband's life insurance payout, your property value, your closeness with your son. Every move she made was calculated. My stomach twisted as I remembered all those seemingly harmless conversations, where Cassie had gently probed about my retirement, my savings, my inheritance plans. I thought she'd been thoughtful. Instead, she'd been plotting. So what now? James asked. Morrison leaned forward. Now we set a trap. Absolutely not, James snapped. I won't let my mother be bait. It's not your choice, I said calmly, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. It's mine. The air in Robert's office shifted. No longer an investigation, it was a strategy session. Morrison laid out the plan. Use me to lure Catherine back, bait her into making contact, catch her in the act of reaching for money. Mrs. Thompson, he said, I understand your son's concerns. There's risk, but Catherine's pattern is clear. She won't walk away without trying to finish what she started. What makes you so sure she'll contact my mother? James demanded. Robert slid another file across the table because according to the investigator's analysis, she never got access to the main prize. Margaret, show him your bank statements. I pulled out the documents I'd brought, though I hadn't understood why they were important. James leaned over the numbers, frowning, and Mom, this shows you still have over $300,000 in savings and investments. James stared at the statements, his brow furrowed. I thought the house sale money was most of what you had. I let you think that. I admitted gently because I didn't want you to feel guilty about accepting my help. But your father's life insurance and our retirement savings were substantial. The house money was just extra. Detective Morrison nodded. Catherine spent months setting up the perfect scenario to access those funds. She's not walking away from $300,000 without another attempt. But she knows we discovered her lies, James protested. Does she? I countered. She overheard us talking and ran, but she doesn't know how much we learned or what evidence we have. For all she knows, we only had suspicions. Morrison smiled faintly. Exactly. And that's where you come in, Mrs. Thompson. We're going to let her believe she still has a chance. The plan was deceptively simple. I would reach out to Catherine through a mutual contact, a nurse at the hospital where she'd claimed to work, though in reality part of her fake employment network. My message would be gentle, confused, never accusing. You'll play the concerned mother-in-law, Morrison explained. The woman who thinks James said something cruel that scared her away. You want to help repair their marriage because you're worried about your son's happiness. If she bites, she'll spin a story to explain her disappearance. She'll likely make James the villain, abusive, controlling, but insist she still loves him and wants to come back. I thought of the woman who had sat at my son's dinner table, who had hugged me with such apparent warmth, who had called me Mom Thompson with tears in her eyes when James proposed. How much of that performance would she resurrect now? There's something else, I said softly. Something I haven't told you. All three men turned toward me. Last week, Cassie asked about my estate planning. She said she worried about James's financial security if something happened to me. She wanted to know if I'd considered making provisions for his spouse in my will. Detective Morrison's eyes sharpened. She was setting up the endgame. I think she was planning an accident. I forced the words out, not right away, but eventually after she secured access to James's assets and arranged to inherit mine. The room went still. James had gone pale. Mom, you can't do this. It's too dangerous. I looked at my son, the intelligent, successful man who had been so thoroughly deceived by someone who saw him as nothing but a stepping stone. Honey, I said firmly, I've been handling dangerous situations longer than you've been alive. And right now, I'm the only chance we have to stop her from destroying another family. 3 days later, I sat in a small coffee shop in downtown Santa Fe, waiting for Catherine Blackwood to walk back into my life. She had responded to my message exactly as Morrison predicted. Poor, frightened Cassie, devastated by James's sudden jealousy, desperate to save their marriage. She claimed she still loved him but had been scared. Could I meet with her? Could I help her understand what went wrong? I agreed at once, slipping easily into my role as the worried mother-in-law who only wanted her children to be happy. The performance felt disturbingly natural, probably because, in part, it was still true. I did want James to be happy, just not with a lie. Morrison's team was scattered around the cafe, disguised as customers, yet I felt oddly calm, sipping my coffee and watching the door. The uncertainty had been worse than the truth. At exactly 2 p.m., she appeared. Her hair was darker now, her makeup subdued, her clothes chosen to suggest struggle rather than success. But there was no mistaking her. This was the same woman who had stolen a year of my son's life and $50,000 of mine, Mom Thompson. She said softly, eyes shining with manufactured tears, "Thank you so much for agreeing to see me." I stood, hugging her warmly the way a loving mother-in-law should while silently marveling at her audacity. "Of course, sweetheart, I've been so worried about you." She sat across from me. I studied her face with new eyes. Now that I knew the truth, I could see the calculation behind every expression, the slight pause before each emotional response, as though she were fine-tuning the mask she wanted me to see. "I don't know where to start," she whispered, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Everything happened so fast. James he changed. He became suspicious of everything I did, every phone call, every friend. He started accusing me of things, saying I was lying about my past." "What kind of things?" I asked gently. "He said I'd never worked at the hospital, which is ridiculous. He even called them pretending to be someone else, asking about me, but of course, they couldn't give out information about employees to random callers when they wouldn't confirm my employment. He decided that meant I'd been lying." I nodded sympathetically. "That does sound like a misunderstanding." And then, she sniffled, "He found some old photos on my phone from before we met. Pictures with a friend's husband at a group dinner, and he became convinced I'd been married before. He wouldn't listen when I tried to explain." The lies flowed so smoothly, each one painting James as paranoid and unstable, while she slipped neatly into the role of victim. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her. "Cassie," I said carefully, "James showed me some documents, bank records and things. He seemed to think there were financial irregularities." For just a moment, her mask cracked. I saw the flash of cold calculation before the tears returned. "That's the worst part," she whispered. "He's convinced I took money from your house sale, Mom Thompson. I would never. I love this family. You've been like a real mother to me." She reached across the table and took my hand. I had to fight the urge to pull away. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly. "But James seems very sure about what he found. Maybe if you could just explain the bank transfers. Show him where the money went." Her grip on my hand tightened. "What bank transfers?" "The $15,000 that went to Phoenix," I said quietly. "He thinks you sent it to someone there." Catherine froze when her eyes lifted to meet mine again. All traces of the sweet daughter-in-law were gone. "How much do you really know?" she asked, her voice colder than I'd ever heard. I smiled. And for the first time in this ordeal, I felt genuinely happy. "Everything, Catherine. We know everything." The transformation was astonishing. In seconds, Catherine Blackwood shed every ounce of vulnerability and revealed the predator she truly was. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she hissed. "That money is gone. And there's nothing you can do to get it back." "Actually," I said, "there's quite a lot we can do." I gestured slightly. Detective Morrison appeared at our table as though he'd stepped out of thin air. 2 more officers moved in at the exits. "Catherine Blackwood, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse." She didn't fight the cuffs, but her glare burned like venom. "This isn't over. You can't prove half of what you think you know." "We don't need to prove half," Detective Morrison said evenly, "just enough." As they led her away, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was being served not just for James and me, but for all the other families she bled dry. Sadness because I had truly liked the woman I thought she was, even if she never really existed. James appeared at my side as the police car pulled away. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I'm fine," I said and realized I meant it. Better than fine. "What happens now?" "Now we rebuild." I told him, and this time, honestly. 6 months later, James and I sat on the deck of my new house, a smaller place. A place I chose for myself, with my own money, no manipulation, no convincing, just mine. The legal proceedings were still ongoing, but Detective Morrison was confident they'd recover at least some of what Catherine had stolen. I got a letter today, James said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. From one of Catherine's other victims, a man in Colorado. His case helped build the pattern evidence against her. What did he say? He thanked us. Said knowing others had been through the same thing made him feel less stupid for falling for her act. I looked at my son, the son who was slowly returning to himself after months of being undermined and isolated. You weren't stupid, James. None of us were. We were human. Still feels pretty stupid. Well, I said with a smile. If we're going to feel stupid about something, let's at least feel stupid for believing in love instead of assuming the worst in everyone. James laughed, a real laugh, the first I'd heard in months. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, I said dryly. You just stopped listening to me for a while. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky gold. My phone buzzed a text from Robert. Final restitution hearing scheduled. Looks like we'll recover about 60%. That's better than Detective Morrison thought we'd get. I told James, what will you do with it? I thought for a moment. The money would help, sure, but it wasn't the most important thing anymore. I said slowly, I'll donate some to a fund for fraud victims. And maybe use the rest to take a long vacation somewhere warm where nobody knows my story and I can just be a woman enjoying her retirement. James smiled. That sounds perfect, Mom. Want company? I thought you'd never ask. And as the night settled over us, I realized Catherine Blackwood had left me with one unexpected gift. She reminded me that Margaret Thompson was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever remembered. Sometimes that's the most valuable thing of all.